Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel, and in this video I'm going to build a sea base for my Fairey Swordfish model. So this is how I did it, and I hope you enjoy the video. I'm going to use this solid piece of wood as my base, and due to the piece of wood being slightly bowed, I fitted some threaded inserts and adjustable feet to the underside. For the sculpting of the ocean, I'm going to use this 30mm thick polystyrene sheet. This is then cut to the same size as the wood block with a hot foam cutter. I then roughly sculpt ocean waves into the polystyrene block using a hot foam cutting wire. Then once I was happy with the basic wave structure, I glued the polystyrene foam to the wood base. I put some weight on it and left it till the next day to dry. At this point I felt I had a few options to proceed. I could use tin foil, clay, soaked watercolour paper, but I opted to use sculptor mould. The sculptor mould is mixed fairly wet and then applied to the foam base. In doing this, I'm smoothing out the wave structure and creating a nice surface texture for the ocean water. And as the sculptor mould starts to go hard, it makes it easier to fine tune the texture. The whole thing is left until the next day to dry. To prepare the surface of the sculptor mould for paint and to smooth out any rough texture, the whole thing is given a coat of matte Mod Podge. Another day later and the whole base is sprayed with a light coat of sea blue. And this is the bit where you can really start to see the waves appearing. Once the whole thing has a fairly uniform coat, I apply the paint much heavier and darker into the troughs between the waves. This leaves the higher main body of the waves a much paler blue, and don't be afraid to leave a few bits of white here and there. Okay, so now I can start taking some steps to make this thing look like actual water. And the first thing I do is take realistic water from Woodland Scenics. And once that's done, again it's left till the next day to dry. Now this is the fun bit, Atlantic water texture, and I've got AK and Vallejo in stock in the shop, so I choose to use AK. Now at first glance this does not look like the kind of blue you want to be applying. But when it's dry it looks great, so apply it liberally all over the base. You can put some nice rippled water texture to the gel by blowing it with air from an airbrush. Then overnight the gel changes into a translucent deep blue. So now we can start detailing some of these waves, and for this I use AK's acrylic water foam. I start out by picking out the crest and then dilute heavily with water to wash the texture down the wave. After cleaning up the edges of any of the water tide marks with a cotton bud, I re-pick out the crest of the wave with a heavy coat of the white foam. I then take a piece of foam and I lightly apply the white texture to blend between the crest and the washed out section. This also has the effect to pick out some of the fine detail in the wave pattern. And then once dry, once again the whole thing is sealed with Woodland Scenic's realistic water. The last step I took in painting the water was to create more of a look of fluidity. For this I first drenched the wave in water. I then used slightly thinned down white acrylic paint and dropped it on the top surfaces of the crest. And because this was done over a highly glossed surface, the paint cascaded away to create a really nice effect, and this was then left to dry. And one thing I didn't show you guys during the build of the Swordfish is how I plan to mount it on the base. And I wanted to mount the model right at the back, leaving the underside of the aircraft as clear as possible. So after drilling a 4mm guide hole, I glued sprue together, creating a sleeve. This sleeve could then also be drilled out to 4mm to insert the mounting rod. This section of the model will eventually be hidden, so I was free to drill it out to the shape of the glued together sprues. And once that was done, the mounting guide was cut to length and then glued really well into the fuselage of the model. So now on to what to use to actually support the model, and I was pondering over this for quite a while. And if I was to use acrylic rod, it would have to be pretty thick to not bend under the weight. The Swordfish is a pretty heavy model when finished, and I'm mounting it right at the back. So after a lot of thinking, I decided to use a 3.2mm TIG welding tungsten. These things are really tough and will not bend easily. So I drilled a 3.5mm hole right through the base and right down into the thick block of wood underneath. The tungsten slotted into about an inch of wood, which gave a really stable mount. I also managed to put a slight bend in the tungsten, which when mounted will give the Swordfish a slight upward tilt. Now, this idea came from a customer that I was talking to in the shop, and I painted the tungsten in a polished finish. And the hopes here is that it would be slightly reflective and blend in better. I then framed the base using thin sheets of balsa wood, which were cut to the contours of the wave pattern. If you're going to copy this in any way, it's a good idea to do this framing just after you've finished the sculptor mould section, because inevitably you end up with a gap that you need to fill. In order to seamlessly blend out this edge, the whole process had to be repeated. And finally the border was painted using a black poster paint. It just so happened that the torpedo slid nice and snugly onto the tungsten mounting rod. It also turned out that once the Swordfish was mounted, the torpedo sat slightly rearward of its mountings as if it had just been dropped. The last step was to slide the Swordfish onto its mount, and this was left loose so it could easily be removed. So that's it for this one, guys. I hope you enjoyed the build. I certainly learnt a lot doing it. If you did enjoy it, hit a like, and if you haven't already, it'd be great if you subscribe to the channel. Also, the Scale Model Shed online store is now live, so you can go and check that out at scalemodelshed.co.uk. So what with setting up the shop and everything, this swordfish project has taken me some time, so I'm looking forward to getting on with the next one. Happy modelling, guys, and see you next time.